Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be back with Exiger Nexus, which is our series where Exiger's experts weigh in on the biggest headlines at the intersection of economic prosperity and national security that matter the most to our customers. So I'm Cody Gerfine. I'm here with Brandon Daniels, Carrie Wibben, and new to Nexus, we have Trevor Stansberry. So welcome to Nexus, Trevor. Yay. There's been a lot going on since our last episode, way more than we can cover in this time. But I wanted to just start with, what is top of mind for all of you? And who wants to kick us off? Maybe Brandon.
Well, so thank you, Cody. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Trevor, for all joining us for another one of these. It's always fun to do these. For me, obviously the risk to the defense industrial base in frail supply chains is always on my mind. But the thing that really interested me this last week was a report published by WTW, which is Willis Towers Watson. They're a large public company, does consulting for lots of big companies. But they published a 2023 renewable energy report. And they said that the most significant risk to our renewable energy transformation in terms of technology and infrastructure and power generation was the risk in our ability to actually build these systems, this infrastructure, because of frail supply chains. They talked about raw material shortages. They talked about inflationary issues. They specifically also talked about geopolitical instability. And in fact, a significant volume of the respondents, almost 60% of them, rated geopolitical risk as a medium risk to their renewable transformation. And I think that where that starts to take root is the fact that, first of all, we've got real forced labor concerns in basically every critical mineral that's used to make an EV battery, that's used to make a solar panel, right? From the Uyghur forced labor issues to the child labor issues in the Congo, we see real intractable problems. And so it's interesting to me that an industry that's supposed to be building a better tomorrow, building a better future, building a more sustainable future is so subject to these significant ESG issues in their supply chains. And so this is something that, for me, is a reminder that companies aren't competing against each other anymore just on a brand-to-brand basis. Actually, supply chains are competing against each other. Tesla is actually competing with Intel for raw materials, right? And this renewable infrastructure, this renewable investment needs to come also with a supply chain investment, supply chain visibility, supply chain technology, because the other thing that the report said is that China is producing up to 60% of mass manufactured clean energy technologies. Well, if I think about how that overlaps with some of the issues that we have in ESG, you can see the problems arising around forced labor. You can see the problems arising around economic coercion. I mean, Carrie, I know that you and I were talking a little bit about the China Select Committee, and you did a much better job of articulating what their recommendations were. I mean, is this sort of issue of forced labor, or these issues of China dependence, are they coming up in Congress? Are they coming up in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Hopefully folks saw, the China Select Committee. It's actually called the House Select Committee on the Strategic Competition between the United States and the Chinese Communist Party. Long title, but accurate. And it's chaired by Representative Mike Gallagher, who I had a chance to have lunch with last week, and who was mentioning some of the updates and the report's recommendations that we saw come out last week in the middle of the week. But they had to do with, first of all, I love this committee because it's bipartisan at a time when you can count on one hand probably the number of issues that really are policy issues that are bipartisan in this town right now. especially with the pending election. And that's
And the debt ceiling.
yeah, and the debt ceiling, and yeah. So they're trying to get as much done on this committee as they possibly can before everyone gets sucked into the void of election season, which is great. But 2 reports last week, and again, the committee is really focused on getting Americans to care and understand why they need to care deeply about the competition with China. And so the committee put out 2 reports last week. This is sort of the second phase of the committee in the work that they've taken on. The first was focused on CCP's ongoing genocide of estimated more than 1 million Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in the Xinjiang region. And it recommended specifically expanding sanctions to those Chinese companies that are directly contributing to the genocide, and also strengthening, Brandon, you know this, we've spent a lot of time on this, supporting our federal clients, strengthening the enforcement of the existing law, the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act, which bans the import of goods, made using Uyghur forced labor. So that was the first set of recommendations. The second report was really focused on deterring the initiation of conflict with Taiwan. And it included a number of combination of recommendations around increased training with the Taiwanese military, speeding the delivery of critical weapon systems and platforms that have already been approved for sale by Congress, and then continuing to strengthen and build out the infrastructure and the bases in the region. So it was really, really exciting to see that work. And the set of recommendations, Representative Gallagher shared that the committee's goal is really to get those recommendations that are policy recommendations, which is the goal of the committee, now translated into law, which is well timed with, and I think these reports came out at a time where they're really getting serious about finalizing the National Defense Authorization Act. So hopefully some of these provisions and policy recommendations make their way into legislation in the NDAA that should be passed later this year. So obviously, those are all great, but if I zoom out and I think about the China problem, I think it really doesn't get us where we need to go. They're good steps, they're good important measures and focus areas, but as everyone knows, we are so heavily dependent on raw materials, critical minerals from China that until we somehow balance that and balance that trade dependency, we really don't. I don't think we get anywhere meaningfully. And so at the federal level, there's I think a good amount of attention, but so much more work to do. And it's such a complex problem. So that's sort of some of the things I've been focused on.
Carrie, it's interesting you should bring that up. I wrote an op-ed that appeared in a publication called The Hill last week. And it was really about the new legislation that Congress has introduced, basically requires EV manufacturers to source a certain amount of the battery content that goes into an electric vehicle in the United States in order to qualify for consumer tax credits. And lithium's a great example, right? So lithium is mined predominantly today in China. There are some other large sources in Chile and in Australia. But while the United States has some large deposits of this stuff, it's notoriously hard to get out of the ground. I thought it was interesting that, I published that piece in The Hill, and then a week later saw an article announcing that significant deposits of lithium have been discovered in, of all places, North Dakota. And these deposits are rumored to be large enough to supply the majority of North American demand for the mineral. So, I mean, there's some good news here, right? I love the fact that Congress has elevated awareness about this issues, and that perhaps there are economic incentives that are being created by Congress that are getting people to take seriously domestic exploration and production of some of these minerals that have been where we've been entirely reliant on China for so long.
Yeah, I mean, I'm encouraged by that too. But then if we take it down to the state level, Trevor, and you and I have talked about this, unfortunately, made in America does not mean owned in America, because we're seeing, really at the state level now, the investment in, manufacturing for critical minerals or battery plants they're occurring, which is great, but there's no check to make sure that that investment isn't going just back to China, right? Because these plants are Chinese owned in a lot of cases. So I think we now need to really help our clients, and our federal clients make sure that the right strings are attached, requirements are in place. So at the state level where this is all being implemented, we're not actually contributing to the problem and inviting our adversary to our back door. Which is really, sad and unfortunate, but it's really why, we have created this entire risk category called foreign ownership, control, and influence, or FOCI. And it's just so critical that we make the ability to understand deeply that and deliver insight into that FOCI risk in your supply chain, your infrastructure, your third-party ecosystem, that we make it really easy and intuitive for our clients to gain that granular view, and then immediately quantify it and put it into context and translate it from a risk management standpoint, so that they can actually move from being completely blind and exposed to having hopefully a much more proactive approach to managing that risk and immediately mitigating the risks that we identify in their ecosystem. But even that first check of just making sure you're not investing in a manufacturer or a company that is Chinese owned, right? Step one. And these are American companies. I'll just throw a few out: Hoover, Milwaukee Tools, Dirt Devil. Everyone would just assume those are good American companies. Guess what? All Chinese owned. Right. Mm-hmm. So that's really the bigger challenge. I think we need to now transition from the federal level to the focus and attention that is required at the state level, where a lot of these laws and the associated funding are going to be implemented.
Well, isn't it great, though, that we bring to the fight the tools necessary to figure this stuff out, not just in terms of illuminating the entities involved in extracting these minerals and producing these materials, but in really mapping and understanding at an item level who the players are that are involved in this business. It's incredible. An article I read the other day, I think it was by the College of Engineering and Mines, said that every year the U.S. spends $4 trillion on rare earth minerals. Wouldn't it be great if we were spending that money with countries not considered potentially adversarial, right? I mean, that would be a real game-changing kind of development.
Yeah, and the dirty secret is that in all of our energy transformation plans and all of our decarbonization plans, the single biggest carbon emission footprint is the logistics to ship all this stuff to the places where it potentially can be assembled, and then potentially to the consumer in the United States. So, there are economic incentives, there are incentives in terms of national security, there are incentives in terms of resilience, but then there's also incentives in terms of our sustainability. So I think, it's like you said, I feel good about the fact that we're giving our customers this visibility, because visibility into the entities, the parts, and the materials are how you start to make a difference in your cost, your resilience, and your compliance.
Well, I think we could keep going for a lot longer, but I would love to do this again. Hopefully sometime soon you'll meet me here and we can continue the conversation. But thanks for everybody for taking the time to break this down for us. There is always so much to learn, and love hearing your insights. So thanks, Trevor, Brandon, and Carrie, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.